Imagine sitting on a plane, heading home for Thanksgiving. The engines are steady, the cabin is quiet. Then a stranger whispers to the flight attendant, "I have a bomb." Hours later, that same stranger would open the rear stairs and step into complete darkness. November 24th, 1971. A quiet afternoon flight from Portland to Seattle. Passengers boarding calmly, no tension, no fear. Among them sat a man in a black suit. Polite, calm, almost invisible. Witnesses later struggled to describe him, not because he was strange, but because he was ordinary. And sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones no one remembers. He paid cash for a one-way ticket. No luggage, no nervous behavior, no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. Psychologically, this matters. Most criminals show stress before action, faster breathing, restless movement, constant scanning of surroundings. He showed none of that. Because this was not an emotional decision, it was a completed plan. When the plane reached the air, he quietly called a flight attendant. He handed her a folded note. At first, she didn't read it. Passengers sometimes gave notes with phone numbers. Then he leaned slightly forward and said, "You might want to read that." The note said he had a bomb. No shouting, no panic, no dramatic threats. Just calm certainty. He opened his briefcase slightly. Inside were wires and cylinders, something that looked frighteningly real. Imagine her position. She must remain calm, walk normally, speak softly, while knowing that one wrong move could cost dozens of lives. This is the psychological side of crimes people rarely discuss. The silent fear. Passengers sitting peacefully, not knowing how fragile their safety had suddenly become. Parents traveling home for Thanksgiving, workers finishing a normal day, students returning to their families. None of them agreed to become part of a criminal plan. Yet in that moment, their lives depended entirely on the calmness of one stranger. The plane landed in Seattle. His demands were delivered. $200,000, 4 parachutes. Notice something important. He asked for 4 parachutes, not 1. Why? Because if he asked for 1, authorities might assume he planned to jump alone and sabotage the parachute. But 4 parachutes suggested he might take a hostage with him. Psychologically, that forced the authorities to cooperate. This was not panic. This was strategic thinking under pressure. Passengers were released. They walked off the aircraft alive, but not unchanged. Some later described the silence inside the cabin as more terrifying than screaming, because silence leaves space for imagination. And imagination can be more frightening than reality. After refueling, the plane took off again. Night had fallen. Rain covered the sky. Below them stretched miles of dark forest. Inside the aircraft, only a few crew members remained. They followed his instructions carefully. Fly lower, keep the speed steady, leave the rear stairs accessible. Think about the pilots. Highly trained professionals, used to control, used to authority. Yet now, they were following orders from a stranger with a briefcase. Control had shifted. And that shift is psychologically powerful. Criminals like this do not only seek money, they seek dominance. The ability to bend reality to their will. At some point during the flight, a crew member noticed something unsettling. He seemed relaxed. Not rushed. Not desperate. Almost patient. That suggests something deeper. He had mentally rehearsed this moment again and again. People who rehearse emotionally reduce fear responses. By the time he stood near the rear stairs, his mind had already jumped. Outside, the wind roared violently. The aircraft trembled. Darkness surrounded everything. And somewhere over Washington State, the rear stairs slowly lowered. Cold air rushed into the cabin. That was the moment. Money strapped to his body, parachute secured. He stepped toward the open night. No speech, no dramatic final words. Just a jump. Into complete darkness. And then he was gone. When the plane finally landed, investigators expected to find clues everywhere. Fingerprints, clear identity, a trail leading somewhere. Instead, they found almost nothing. A black clip-on tie left behind. A few vague descriptions from witnesses. And one overwhelming mystery. Who was this man? Psychological profilers began studying his behavior carefully. He was calm under extreme pressure, highly organized, knowledgeable about aircraft mechanics, comfortable handling parachute equipment. All of these details suggested something important. This was not an amateur. This was someone trained, disciplined, and emotionally controlled. Possibly military, possibly aviation-related, possibly someone used to high-risk environments. But one psychological factor stood out above all others. Emotional detachment. Empathy prevents many crimes. When people emotionally connect with others, they hesitate to cause harm. But when individuals begin seeing people as obstacles, numbers, or variables, moral hesitation weakens. On that aircraft, dozens of lives depended on his decisions. Yet he showed no visible emotional conflict. That does not always mean cruelty. Sometimes it means something quieter. A personality trained to suppress emotion in order to complete objectives. Investigators also noticed something unusual. He avoided unnecessary violence. He released passengers as soon as possible. He communicated calmly. This combination created a psychological contradiction. Highly dangerous behavior, yet controlled interaction. It raised a difficult question. Was he a desperate criminal? Or someone who believed he was simply executing a calculated operation? Meanwhile, for the passengers and crew, life slowly returned to normal on the outside. But internally, many carried something invisible. Moments replaying in memory. The quiet voice, the folded note, the realization that survival had depended on the mood of a stranger. Psychologists call this delayed stress response. The body survives first, the mind reacts later. And sometimes, that reaction lasts for years. While investigators searched forests, rivers, and mountains, another search quietly continued. A search for identity. Because solving the crime was not only about finding money, it was about understanding the mind that believed the perfect escape was possible. Let's confront a difficult possibility. What if he was not as confident as he appeared? What if the calmness was not superiority, but preparation hiding fear? Human beings are complex. Sometimes the calmest exterior covers the loudest internal storm. Jumping into freezing darkness at night over dense forest is not a guaranteed survival plan. Experts later argued that the conditions were brutal. Heavy rain, strong wind, low visibility. He was wearing a business suit, not survival gear. If he survived, it would have required skill and luck. So we ask, did he truly believe he would land safely? Or was this the final act of a man who had already accepted uncertainty? Psychologically, high-risk behavior can come from two places: extreme confidence or quiet desperation. We do not know which one drove him, but we do know this: he was willing to step into darkness without guarantee of survival. That decision alone reveals something powerful about his mindset. Risk tolerance that most people do not possess. A belief that uncertainty was preferable to capture. And that belief is deeply psychological, because fear of consequence usually restrains people. He either overcame that fear or replaced it with something stronger. Meanwhile, the investigation continued for decades. Hundreds of suspects were examined. Stories surfaced, confessions appeared, and theories collapsed. But nothing was proven. In 2016, the official investigation was suspended. Not solved. Just inactive. And sometimes, a case without closure is more haunting than a solved one. Let's confront a difficult possibility. What if he was not as confident as he appeared? What if the calmness was not superiority, but preparation hiding fear? Human beings are complex. Sometimes the calmest exterior covers the loudest internal storm. Jumping into freezing darkness at night over dense forest is not a guaranteed survival plan. Experts later argued that the conditions were brutal. Heavy rain, strong wind, low visibility. He was wearing a business suit, not survival gear. If he survived, it would have required skill and luck. So we ask, did he truly believe he would land safely? Or was this the final act of a man who had already accepted uncertainty? Psychologically, high-risk behavior can come from two places: extreme confidence or quiet desperation. We do not know which one drove him, but we do know this: he was willing to step into darkness without guarantee of survival. That decision alone reveals something powerful about his mindset. Risk tolerance that most people do not possess. A belief that uncertainty was preferable to capture. And that belief is deeply psychological, because fear of consequence usually restrains people. He either overcame that fear or replaced it with something stronger. Meanwhile, the investigation continued for decades. Hundreds of suspects were examined. Stories surfaced, confessions appeared, theories collapsed. But nothing was proven. In 2016, the official investigation was suspended. Not solved. Just inactive. And sometimes, a case without closure is more haunting than a solved one. While the world debated theories, the people inside that cabin returned to ordinary life. Or at least, they tried to. Imagine boarding another flight weeks later, sitting in a narrow seat, hearing the engine start, and remembering the moment a stranger whispered, "I have a bomb." Trauma does not always appear immediately. Sometimes, the body survives first. Then the mind replays everything in quiet moments. For some crew members, sleep became difficult. For others, the sense of safety inside aircraft was permanently altered. The human brain remembers threats in order to prevent them from happening again. But when the threat is unpredictable, the brain stays alert, even when there is no danger. That constant alertness is exhausting and invisible. We rarely hear their names. We rarely hear their stories, because mystery focuses attention on the one who disappeared, not the many who endured. There's something psychologically unfair about that. The criminal becomes unforgettable. The victims become background. Yet courage inside that aircraft came from the crew. Calm communication, measured tone, careful cooperation. They protected lives under extreme psychological pressure. That quiet bravery deserves recognition. Because survival that day was not only about his plan, it was about their restraint. And restraint under threat is one of the strongest human traits. So what remains? A name that might not be real. A jump into darkness. And a mystery that refuses to close. Some believe he survived. That he landed safely, changed his identity, lived quietly. Others believe the forest kept him. That the cold, the wind, and the rain ended the story that night. But here's the deeper question. If he survived, what kind of life followed? Did he watch the news, hearing his own myth grow larger? Did he feel pride? Or did he feel something quiet? Something heavier? Because escaping consequence does not always silence conscience. And even if the world forgets details, the mind remembers moments. The note. The fear in someone's eyes. The sound of wind before stepping into nothing. There's a strange irony in this case. He wanted control. And for a few hours, he had absolute control. But after the jump, control disappeared. Gravity, weather, chance. Those forces do not negotiate. And maybe that is the final lesson. Control is temporary. Consequences are unpredictable. And mystery, no matter how fascinating, does not erase impact. The passengers survived. The crew survived. But something inside the cabin changed forever. And somewhere, whether in memory, in regret, or in legend, the man called D.B. Cooper remains suspended in the air. Not landing. Not falling. Just frozen between myth and consequence. And that is where the story ends.